This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome into Rhode Island's podcast of record, the Bartholomew Town Podcast. It's Bill Bartholomew here with you for new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, and whenever breaking news happens on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast, ripodcast.com, wherever you like to get the show. Today, we return to our monthly series, Inside Rhode Island Cannabis, presented by PureVita Labs, with a panel discussion featuring medical doctors Jason Iannuccilli and Jonathan Martin, along with PhD cannabis chemist Stuart Procter, discussing the cannabis industry's THC problem, that is to say, THC potency in legal marijuana as an overvalued and misleading industry standard. Really interesting discussion. We get into the entourage effect of why consumers should be considering much more than THC potency levels when assessing which product they should utilize, either in a medical context or soon to be recreational context here in Rhode Island. And look, this series has been getting tremendous feedback, and I can feel it. I can feel the void in cannabis coverage here in the state. Now, there is some stuff that happens on some of the outlets that is effective in showcasing what's happening from an industrial side, from a business standpoint, right? And obviously, there's plenty of stuff out there assessing, like, all right, what's the best rolling tray and that, cannabis culture kind of stuff. Nah, I don't mean to dismiss that, but we're trying to go to a higher level here of understanding and answer many of the burning questions that a lot of you have. I'm sure of it. And I sense that void, and I'm so very pleased that we're able to fill it here on B-Town in collaboration with PureVita Labs. If you would like to support the independent journalism, opinion, analysis, and entertainment that B-Town is known for, well, there's a few ways you may do so. One, you can simply follow, rate, and review the podcast wherever you're listening right now. Or if you want to go a step further, for as little as $3 per month, you can become a B-Town insider. You'll get exclusive monthly content and be helping to sustain this independent program. Simply head to patreon.com/BartholomewTown or click the support link wherever you're listening right now. And be sure to follow me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, even LinkedIn. Just search for me at Bill Bartholomew. Hey, cannabis users, do you know what's in your cannabis? Recreational use legalization is on the horizon, and consumer health is PureVita Labs' priority. If you use cannabis, choose lab-tested, legal cannabis products over unlabeled black market products, which are likely to contain harmful contaminants. You know that stuff at the gas station, all that nonsense, untested? Don't go there. Choose legal products that offer a safe and controlled cannabis experience. Now, how do you get that? Through competent testing. And competent testing labs are the gatekeepers to the legal cannabis industry. PureVita Labs, founded by physicians and PhD chemists, is rooted in science and built on integrity. They're committed to helping cultivators and product manufacturers deliver clean and accurately labeled cannabis products to you, the consumer. So know what's in your cannabis, know your dose, control your experience, and visit purevitalabs.com. That's PureVitalabs.com. All right, welcome back into Inside Rhode Island Cannabis, presented by PureVita Labs here on the Bartholomew Town Podcast, Rhode Island's podcast of record. Wherever you're listening right now, ripodcast.com, Spotify, Apple, or on the radio on WPRO. Welcoming back our panel of experts here on a vital topic. There's no question about it. If you guys could each quickly introduce yourselves again, I'm sure the audience is starting to get familiar with each of you, but why not? Why not do the intros?
I'm Dr. Jason Iannuccilli, one of the co-founders of PureVita Labs.
Dr. Jonathan Martin, also one of the co-founders.
And Dr. Stuart Procter, analytical chemist and laboratory director at PureVita Laboratories.
So today we have a very interesting discussion on the cannabis industry's quote unquote THC problem, THC potency in legal marijuana, and how it's overvalued and leading the industry astray. So let's get right into it. Many states have legalized marijuana for recreational use. Many have become critical of the current industry for what seems like a shift towards offering consumers only very high potency THC products. Is this the current trend? And if so, why is this happening?
So yes, this is absolutely the trend. And it seems to be universal across all marijuana markets that are, in various stages of legalization across the country. Unfortunately, what it does is, by emphasizing these high potency THC products or THC only products, we're really kind of taking a market that started as a medicinal market, and we're moving these product offerings away from that medicinal sense into more of a recreational type realm. And, we're obviously going to discuss this in more detail, today during our conversation, but that's a really important thing to keep in mind here. I mean, there are still people that are, there are lots of people that are using cannabis medicinally as a medication. And if we're not providing them with products that have the right formulation of active ingredients in there, and we're overemphasizing THC at the expense of the others, we're creating products that are potentially less effective for their ailments. A lot of this shift in THC potency is due to selective breeding. People are crossbreeding these strains. They're creating strains that are going to produce more THC, and unfortunately, in doing that, it's lower amounts of CBD that are present in these cannabis, strains and flowers. And we know that CBD has many medicinal effects. We know the molecular actions of CBD to a certain extent inside the body. And we know that, there are things that CBD does that if you don't have it in the product, certain people with certain qualifying illnesses may not be getting the effects that they need to adequately treat their symptoms. So THC content is not like it used to be. I mean, that's a fact. Prior to the 1990s, believe it or not, the THC content on average in marijuana was around 2 to 4%. During the 1990s, it increased to about 4 to 7%. But since the year 2000, we've seen a greater than 200% increase in the average THC content of marijuana flower that's available, especially in legal markets. So typically now that range is about 17 to 28%, just based on the data that's reported. Really, like, just to give you an idea, if you're taking a cannabis flower, some of the most potent marijuana is really in about the 30% THC range, maybe slightly higher. But, you see some products out there that are labeled at like 35%. I'd question the accuracy of that label. But bottom line is that these strains are definitely more potent in THC, and they have almost no CBD in them anymore. So this current market trend of offering these really highly concentrated, like THC products, like especially these extracts that are upwards of 95% THC by product weight, it's creating a little bit of a paradigm shift here. And I think that we're actually abandoning a large proportion of cannabis users in terms of the applicability of these products to really address the reason why they use it. One other thing I will mention, which is sort of at the root of this entire discussion, is this driving factor of THC potency being the sort of de facto measure of product value. Products are being sold and priced according to their THC potency. And, look, most consumers, when they see a product that's more expensive, they assume that it's got better quality. So, I think that there is a driving force here in the way that the industry has been leading consumers toward more potent products. But, my point is that these consumers have really, I think we're being led astray. And I think that there are certain changes that we need to make, because there's absolutely no correlation between the potency of THC in a product and the perceived quality of a cannabis experience, according to the consumer.
Let's kind of break this down on several levels. Let's start with this concept of lab shopping. And it's something that, I guess with an emphasis on THC potency, it seems to be talked about frequently. And I guess explain what lab shopping is and why it's a problem.
So I think we had talked about that earlier, actually, in the last episode a little bit. And the idea of testing based on the products that people are handing off to the lab. So if you're growing a plant, and I think we used a rose as an example last time, and you have this beautiful bud on the very top of the plant, and you pluck that bud and you show that to somebody and say, this is what I'm growing. Well, back at your greenhouse, you may have a bunch of, rotting flower buds on the rest of the plant, but that one bud looks beautiful. And to someone who sees that, they're going to think your entire rose bush is gorgeous. Not the case. So when someone hands off a sample of their cannabis plant that they grew to a laboratory and says, test this, You have no idea if that's representative of the entire plant. And in reality, in order to get a representative sample of all of the product that's going to wind up on the store shelves, you have to have a sampling process, a scientifically validated sampling process, which is an intense undertaking, to be honest. I mean, our sampling process is almost 12 pages just to choose a sample. But a lot of these cultivators will be looking to get the highest number on those labels, the highest rating of THC, and they'll choose the part of the plant that is most likely to have the highest level of THC. It's an inaccurate label at that point because it's not representative of all the plant. And obviously there's, reasons for this. Higher THC concentrations drive prices in the market. Unfortunately, it's not appropriate, but it is what we're dealing with right now.
And, I would add one thing. I mean, the real problem with this is that when cultivators are shopping around and really just looking for the lab that's going to generate the highest THC potency numbers, it sort of drives the quality of lab practices in the wrong direction. I mean, the motivation is strictly financial. There's really no concern about the accuracy of the label with that practice, and that's just because of the way that the market overemphasizes the value of THC. So what it really does is it rewards either incompetent labs that are not testing correctly, or labs that are really being disingenuous, that are falsely inflating THC numbers just to get a competitive advantage. It's a huge problem for the industry because product labels are inaccurate as a result of it. And because of the inaccuracy of the label and the inconsistent experiences that consumers are getting, it really destroys the credibility of the industry. And we talked about black market influence. I mean, if you're charging more for a product that's frustrating the consumer because the label's not even accurate, that's one of the benefits of buying legal, is that you know what's in it. So that is a driving factor as well that is, allowing the black market to persist. We've seen plenty of media stories out there about disingenuous lab practices in other states. We hope to avoid those in Rhode Island. Currently there are 2 labs that are in hot water in Arizona because they were sort of caught, deliberately inflating THC potency numbers, for financial gain. So they're on the verge of having their licenses revoked. And, it's not only that, it's not just the threat of losing your license. It's the cultivator clients now face the risk of a product recall. I mean, we saw this happen in Michigan. That was one of the largest recalls we've seen in the marijuana market history. And it's really because there was uncertainty about the credibility of the lab results. So, that's real. That's a real risk, and it affects everybody. I mean, financially, you could be out millions of dollars from a massive recall like that. So it's a big problem, and it's something that, we need to work to address.
Dr. Procter, would you say that based on an analytical chemistry standpoint, that some of these labs are just simply making up THC potency? They're saying, well, the cultivator is looking to get 27% on this label. I'm looking to get continued business from this cultivator, so I'm just going to put 27% on the label. Or is it something more complex than that?
No, not necessarily. I mean, obviously, that would be really risky behavior. I mean, there are a lot of checks and balances that are put in place by the DOH to make sure that what we're doing in laboratories is analytically accurate. So, and obviously, if a lab was consistently generating random numbers, that would be picked up by the regulatory bodies over time. It's really more a case of boosting the THC potency. It's actually really easy to do in subtle ways. There's not. Sometimes it's maybe even unknowingly. I mean, there are multiple ways that you can perform an extraction, for example, or you perform homogenization, or even just simply how you perform the liquid handling for the dilutions. It can have a large impact on data. So I'm not saying that. I'm pretty sure there are states or the labs in other states that have been terribly naughty and just done exactly what you said, and they have been caught, which is good for the industry. But yeah, it's really, I would say, comes back to the question of a little bit of the standardization that we discussed in the last episode. There's definitely ways in which a lab could either unknowingly or knowingly get a high bias on a number. And it could be simply just looking at the way a product dissolves or how you fill a flask volumetrically. I mean, for example, we always use gravimetric analysis, which is actually far more accurate than volumetric analysis. So, there are simple things like that which aren't in the regs that could be put in there that would help prevent this. So, but yeah, I mean, to answer the initial question, yes, it is quite possible for a lab to generate a higher number and stay within the current regulations, just based on the flexibility and the methodologies that are allowed in the facilities.
Yeah, we talked about, in a previous episode that, the sort of calibration standard that's used for QA purposes. I mean, if you leave that out for too long and the potency content of cannabinoids in it is degraded and it's lower than what's written on the label, you're matching that calibration to what's written on the label of that standard. And that can cause inflated potency readings. It can be as simple as that. But, look, in competitive markets, we talked about the importance of limiting lab licenses because, the strong financial incentive for labs to cheat just to be viable is real. And it's happening all across the country. So we want to avoid that in Rhode Island because it's going to destroy the accuracy of our product labels. It's going to create consumer distrust and devalue lab testing, which is really important. And again, as we mentioned, it's going to allow the black market to still compete.
Every month on the Bartholomew Town podcast, I take you inside Rhode Island public health, presented by Commonwealth Care Alliance. It's a feature that examines pretty much everything public health related other than directly anyway, COVID-19 and a hospital merger, right? The two major topics that have dominated that sector for years. There's so much in terms of innovation, in terms of opportunity, in terms of just information that can be really useful to all of us. And we examine it on a monthly basis. It's Inside Rhode Island Public Health right here on the Bartholomew Town podcast every month, presented by Commonwealth Care Alliance.
Rhode Island and national politics, media, arts, and newsmakers. Bartholomew Town with Bill Bartholomew, Saturdays at 3 p.m. on News Talk 99.7 FM and AM 630 WPRO.
Now back to B-Town.
Dr. Procter, I guess explain what can be done here in Rhode Island to prevent this sort of lab shopping behavior in our own soon-to-be legal cannabis industry on a recreational side, but right now on a medicinal side. What is blinded round-robin testing, and how does that help police laboratory practices?
Absolutely. A very good question. So just recently, we did something called a round-robin test where samples are presented a lab by the state, and of course, that's then sent to each laboratory, which they then have to process and generate analytical data for, which is then represented back to the state and then distributed. So I would say that in Rhode Island, we're lucky that we don't have this problem right now. For the last results we got, every label was within 0.5% of each other, which is excellent. To do a true blinded round robin is actually very tricky, and that's something that I think we want to move towards in the state. And that would be where the actual lab receives a sample and they don't even know it's a round robin sample. Essentially, it enters through standard means, that number then gets generated and sent back. I mean, right now, there is wiggle room, of course. I mean, if you know a sample has extra scrutiny, it's easy in a lab situation to give that lab sample that little bit of extra attention. But yeah, the difficulties of that for sure. But I would say right now that the state's doing a great job at policing this, and in actual fact, they're talking about doing another round robin soon. And again, it just keeps everyone on track, and it also makes sure that it doesn't matter which cultivator goes to which lab, they're going to get the same data back regarding not just potency, by the way, also microbiological testing, metals, and everything, because there's a full panel of tests that can be important. So, for example, lab shopping, we've talked about potency, but lab shopping can also consist of a lab that's consistently passing samples which are dangerous to the public, right? So if one lab's always testing a particular product and saying, well, this has always got metals in, and then the cultivator has to do a whole bunch of work afterwards, where another lab's saying it doesn't have metals in, that's just as problematic as getting different potency numbers.
Yeah. And so one other point there, just to clarify, the results coming from the 3 labs in operation here in Rhode Island are almost spot on. As Stuart said, they're within 0.5%, which is great because that means there's lower incentive for people to shop around for those THC potency levels. But other states have tried other things. I mean, blinded round robin testing and sort of pop quizzes are pretty good ways to keep labs on their toes. But New York, for example, has decided to tax recreational cannabis by THC potency. Is it going to work? I mean, we don't know. We'll see. There are also, laws that are being proposed to set THC limits in products so that, you really can only achieve a certain potency. And it's not like it's sort of like really hard to get there. So that would adjust product pricing as well. So again, it's a problem, but there are things that are being done to try to address it. We mentioned the license caps for labs just to try to minimize the amount of competition and make sure that there's enough revenue out there to keep people viable. So it's not like they're fighting for their lives. And, look, I mean, it's like the steroid controversy in sports. You take a professional athlete, if everyone else is using steroids and your future in the sport depends on it, you're more likely to do it, just to stay in the game. And that's exactly what's going on in a lot of markets. We just don't want to see that happen in Rhode Island.
Yeah. How do we fix this? I mean, consumer demand in any competitive market, whether it's, any business, sunglasses, cannabis, doesn't matter. Consumer demand is ultimately what drives a market at the end of the day. But on an acute level, what's the best way to address this and sort of pivot as we move forward into terra incognito here in Rhode Island with what seems to be upcoming recreational cannabis?
I mean, I think it's exactly what we're doing now. It's consumer education. We can help from a scientific standpoint to get consumers better understanding of what these active ingredients do, what to look for on a product label. So they're not so much focusing on just THC anymore. We talked about this entourage effect, all the other substances that are present in cannabis, like terpenes that are the flavor and aroma compounds that kind of help modulate that THC experience. It can be the difference between an upper or a downer experience with a certain product. So a lot of consumers don't know how to select products for a purpose. And I think education directly to the public is a way to sort of address the market trend. I mean, that will set the demand. These higher potency THC products that are like, flooding the shelves almost exclusively right now. I mean, if they sort of are falling out of favor, then, you will see the industry start to shift focus because it's much more expensive to grow very high potency THC products than it is to grow somewhat milder products that may resonate better with a lot of consumers.
Yeah. To that point, Dr. Martin, do you think that the legal industry might be kind of shooting itself in the foot and degrading their opportunity by focusing too much on THC?
Yeah, 100%. THC, for all intents and purposes, is an impairing molecule, while CBD is a more therapeutic molecule. So I think when you ask a consumer what they're using cannabis for, in Rhode Island, we have a medical market. And so the majority of people in Rhode Island, we hope, are using this for medical reasons. And with the limited research in cannabis that we have, what we do know is that CBD and other cannabinoids are far more involved with the therapeutic effects of cannabis than just the impairing effects or the psychoactive effects of cannabis, which is primarily THC. And the focus on just the level of THC allows products to be created that breed out all of the other important aspects of that product. So as an example, we know that CBD will actually bind to the receptor that THC is binding to also. It'll change the shape of that receptor such that THC doesn't sit in it as long. It'll bounce in and out of the receptor. And so the effect of the high THC concentration is actually limited by the CBD being there. We know that THC simply binds to the CB1 receptor and causes these psychoactive neurotransmitters to be released and for that impairment to occur. But CBD is also binding to other receptors like the GABA receptor, which is the receptor that Valium would bind to. It's a sedating molecule. It binds to your 5-HT1 receptor, which is your serotonin receptor. It's almost an antidepressant, right? So it binds to that receptor, changes its shape. So when it binds serotonin, it holds on to it longer. That's the love hormone, right? Who doesn't want that? So when you focus only on THC, you lose all of these therapeutic benefits from the other cannabinoids. And so that's why, for us as physicians looking to, create products or point patients in the direction of appropriate products, you have to look at the ratios of cannabinoids. It's not just CBD. There's CBG, there's CBN, there's CBV. There's many other cannabinoids. There's over 100 of them, but there's about 15 that we're that are the major classes that we've been able to focus on. And the ratios of those to THC is really important. CBD, just as one other example, binds to the CB1 receptor for when a molecule called anandamide, which is an endocannabinoid. It's a cannabinoid like THC that your body makes on its own. And athletes have high levels of anandamide, and it's considered responsible for slowing down time to where a pitcher can, in a moment, know exactly how his muscles have to be utilized to pitch a ball at 100 miles an hour and hit a target like a laser beam. In that pitcher's mind, at that very moment, things are slowed down to a point where he can see all of it. And that is due to the endocannabinoid system. And CBD actually allows anandamide to stick in that receptor longer. So the therapeutic effect of even being more aware of your surroundings and being more present in the moment is not a THC responsible effect. It's a CBD responsible effect. So, a lot of these things, when people are like, I can't wait for recreational cannabis. Why? Well, I like the way it makes me feel. A lot of people think the way they feel is because of THC, and it's simply not the case. It's just false.
Yeah, it's an entourage effect. And again, we could go on and on about the science here, and you could craft entire episodes on this, but the real take-home point is that, we need to inject more science back into this industry. We are at that point now. This is on the verge of widespread legalization. Like, it's time to let the science have a voice. Like, we've kept it hidden for so long. The information is out there. It's education to the consumer. That's what we kind of hope to do on the clinical side of what we're doing here at PureVita Labs. I would also argue that, not only in medicinal markets, but also in recreational markets, high potency THC products are probably missing the mark. Think about it. Inexperienced consumers are likely to be very sensitive to THC effects. So when you legalize for recreational use, there may be a lot of adult users out there that maybe had used it remotely in the past or whatever, but they're curious now. They're like, okay, now these product formulations are different. I don't have to just not know what I'm ingesting. I can do it in a more controlled fashion. So they may want to try it again for therapeutic reasons, stress relief, you name it. And honestly, high potency THC products are more likely to give them an experience that is almost like a hypersensitivity type experience where they're more anxious and nervous and they have that rapid heart rate and that paranoia that can destroy a, introductory experience to this industry. So I think if the industry really wants to cater to everybody, they need to start bringing back these sort of ratioed products, the CBD to THC ratios that are, they're a little bit gentler on the endocannabinoid system, on the endocannabinoid receptors, just to give people the experience they desire without sort of force feeding them these hyper potent products because it makes the most money. I think price, honestly, could be set according to quality of the product and how consistently it's manufactured from batch to batch. That would be a better way to price product than THC potency alone.
Yeah, it certainly makes way more sense. And as you reference, a lot of people are going to have a panic attack on day one, and then they're going to say, or something resembling a panic attack or another stressful outcome and say, yeah, okay, you know what? I'm not interested in this as from a recreational standpoint, or even potentially from a medical standpoint. Dr. Procter, I guess, kind of our last question here. What advice do you have to patients who are trying to better understand this entourage effect, and what should they be looking for in a product label when they're going to make a purchase currently in a medical context here in Rhode Island? But again, we keep referencing this, but soon to be a general context.
Yeah, I think my biggest piece of advice would be to find out as much about the product as you can. And now part of the problem you have is that the actual information that you get on labels right now is incredibly limited. If you go to any official store, I think they just give you a Delta 9 THC number. So, I think it is even the case, ask the people behind the counter to see a COA, because even behind that one number, there's a whole batch of data that they have available to you. And again, it's not everything. It's the terpenes, not just the THC, the CBD, the CBA, the THCV. There's literally a whole plethora of information that's kind of tucked away. And part of what we're doing here is trying to educate people that information is out there. And you may have to dig for a little bit. Now, we're also working here at PureVita to try and make that information more accessible. But there's actually...
No, go ahead.
No. I mean, as we've said, the science is actually very strongly pointed towards, that overall the CBD, the THC ratio is important. I mean, those two numbers are on the COA. But again, there's the terpenes, which is probably one of the most predominant effects in how you experience a product. They're not even tested by a lot of people. Now, some cultivators are testing terpenes. And again, you can get that information from the COA if you request it. But this is it. I mean, really, the driving force here is to visit. And again, if we can get people to focus more on the quality of the product, it takes away that whole lab shopping market. It takes away hero sampling. It takes away all the problems that are existent in the market comes from people's misunderstanding of how to use the product. I mean, honestly, I think right now, there are actually a lot of manufacturers and cultivators out there that are starting to produce a variety of different strains, but it's obviously in their best interest too, right? Because you don't want to, as a cultivator, you don't want to isolate yourself from the audience that may benefit from your product. I mean, I see a point in the future where, you walk into a dispensary and the most expensive product on the shelf isn't the one with the highest THC. It's actually the one that someone tried 3 weeks ago, said that was an amazing experience. And this is because I looked at the COA, excuse me. This is because I looked at the COA and I understood the information on the COA. And that's also a bigger project that we're working on here, to try and present data in a way that's more consumable to end users, so they can have a better understanding of how a particular product will affect their physiology.
And I think that there are some dispensaries and some cultivators that are putting on the label as much information as possible, not just regulatory information. And as Stu points out, you can always ask to see the certificate of analysis that is really the full label, right? Not the one that actually gets slapped on the product, but the real label that comes from the lab is called the certificate of analysis. And you can ask to see that. And, on some online menus, we've seen that the dispensaries will actually provide that to the consumer directly. But it is important to start to look at these other things, the terpenoids and the other cannabinoids besides just THC, because those really will affect the actual, the therapeutic effects of the product, and the uses of the product, and whether or not it's a safe product for certain people with certain conditions, or if it's not. So I think we're moving toward that education. There are ways to visually interpret the levels of terpenes and other cannabinoids to provide some information to people about what they can expect based on what the ratios of those products are.
Yeah, and so final point. I mean, we obviously as an industry need to improve how lab data is presented to the consumer. This educational mission is huge. It's a big part of what we exist for here at PureVita. It's got to be comprehensive enough, but easily understood. And, it's got to be able to be used by the consumer to make these point of sale purchase decisions. So, we're really focused on that. And, we'll be able to talk more in the future about, how we plan to address that here in the Rhode Island market. Again, it's definitely an area of need. And I think that the whole point is we need to inject science back into this and let people choose the right product for their desired effect, and make sure these labels are accurate so they can use these products at their effective dose. That's the bottom line.
This is Inside Rhode Island Cannabis, presented by PureVita Labs here on B-Town. Doctors, as always, thank you so much for your time. Coming up in episode 4, we plan to talk more about how the current industry practice limits consumer access to product information, and how labs and regulators can change this. We'll also discuss terpenes and how knowing a product's terpene profile can help consumers better choose a particular product for a desired effect. We'll also talk about how PureVita will address consumer needs in this space in the near future. Doctors, thanks as always.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rhode Island's podcast of record, B-Town.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.